Worked since 16, did all housework while my sisters relaxed. When I confronted them, Sarah stared around her tiny, one-bedroom apartment. Boxes were still stacked in corners, a mishmash of thrift store furniture filled the space, and the only decoration was a small, slightly wilted succulent on the windowsill. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Every chipped plate, every mismatched cushion, represented a hard-won victory. At 26, she was finally, truly independent. But the journey to this cramped, yet liberating, space had been a long and painful one. To understand it all, we have to go back to when Sarah was just 8 years old. That's when her younger sisters, the twins, Lily and Mia, were born. Sarah remembers the day vividly. Her parents, Robert and Susan, brought the two tiny, pink bundles home from the hospital. Sarah, thrilled to be a big sister, stood on her tiptoes, peering into the bassinet. Robert ruffled her hair, a rare gesture of affection. "You're a big girl now, Sarah," he said, his voice unusually soft. "These two are going to need your help. You'll be their protector, their little helper." Sarah, puffed up with pride, took those words to heart. She had no idea how completely they would define the next 18 years of her life. It started innocently enough. Sarah would fetch diapers, entertain the twins while Susan cooked, and tidy up their toys. "Sarah, be a dear and grab me a burp cloth," Susan would call from the rocking chair, a perpetually tired look on her face. "Sarah, can you keep an eye on Lily and Mia for a few minutes?" Robert would ask, already halfway out the door. At first, Sarah enjoyed feeling needed, important. She'd complete her little tasks with a sense of accomplishment, basking in the occasional good girl, Sarah from her parents. But as the twins grew, so did Sarah's responsibilities. By the time she was 10, she was practically a third parent. She'd supervise the twins' playtime, help them with their homework, when she had time after finishing her own, and even prepare simple meals. "Sarah, watch your sisters while we run to the store," Susan would say, grabbing her purse. "We'll be back in a couple of hours." "But Mom, I was going to go to the park with Emily," Sarah would protest, already knowing the answer. "Your sisters need you here, Sarah. You can play with your friends another time." But another time rarely came. The twins always needed something, a snack, a story, a referee for their squabbles. Sarah loved Lily and Mia, she truly did. But she couldn't help noticing the stark difference in how they were treated. Her own 11th birthday was a quiet affair. A small, store-bought cake, a used video game from her dad, and a handmade bracelet from her one friend who was allowed to come over. They ate cake, played a single board game, and then it was over. A month later, the twins turned 4. It was a lavish celebration. Balloon animals, face painting, a custom-made cake with their names in elaborate frosting, and a backyard full of screaming preschoolers. The gifts overflowed, new toys, clothes, games, everything a child could dream of. And after everyone left, Sarah spent 2 hours cleaning up the mess, while Lily and Mia gleefully played with their new treasures. By 13, Sarah was essentially running the household. She'd wake the twins, get them dressed, make their breakfast and pack their lunches. She'd walk them to elementary school before rushing to her own middle school. After school, the cycle repeated: pick them up, help with homework, cook dinner, clean the house, and then, finally, try to squeeze in her own studies late into the night. Both Robert and Susan worked full-time jobs, and they seemed to conveniently forget that Sarah was still a child herself. When she turned 16, things took a sharp turn for the worse. Her parents called her into the kitchen for a family meeting, though the twins were conspicuously absent. "Sarah," Robert began, his face unusually serious, "we need to discuss something important." Susan nodded, her expression grim. "We're having some financial difficulties. We need you to get a job after school to help support the family." Sarah stared at them, stunned. "But what about my homework? And taking care of Lily and Mia?" "You'll still need to do those things," Susan said dismissively. "You can find a job with flexible hours." The very next day, Sarah applied at a local diner, the Corner Cafe, just a few blocks from their house. The owner, a kind, older man named George, hired her on the spot when she explained her availability. She started as a dishwasher, then moved on to cleaning tables, and eventually, serving customers. Every single paycheck went straight to her parents. Every cent. When she dared to ask if she could keep even a small amount for herself, Susan looked at her as if she'd committed a cardinal sin. "We feed you and put a roof over your head, Sarah," she snapped. "This family needs this money." After weeks of agonizing, Sarah finally confronted her mother again, pleading for a small allowance. Susan, after a long, furious glare, grudgingly agreed to give her $50 a week. The way she handed over the money, however, like she was bestowing some incredible gift, made it clear she thought Sarah was being unreasonable. Despite working nearly 30 hours a week, Sarah was still expected to fulfill all her household duties. One evening, she dragged herself home after a particularly grueling shift. Her entire body ached, and all she wanted was to eat something and collapse into bed. She walked into the house to find her parents and the twins sitting at the dinner table, all of them glaring at her. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, dropping her backpack by the door. "We're hungry," Susan said accusingly. "You didn't make dinner." Sarah stared at them, completely dumbfounded. "I've been at school and then work all day," she said, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "That's no excuse," Robert chimed in. "You know dinner is your responsibility." Something inside Sarah snapped. For the first time in her life, she raised her voice at her parents. "Are you serious? I went to school, then worked for 6 hours straight. You're adults, the twins are 9. None of you could figure out how to make a sandwich?" The shocked silence that followed her outburst was almost satisfying. Then, Susan stood up, her face hard. "Don't you dare speak to us that way. This is our house, and you will show respect. Go to your room. No dinner for you tonight." Sarah watched, numb with disbelief, as Robert picked up the phone and ordered 2 large pizzas, for them and the twins, not for her. She made herself a cup of tea, washed everyone's dishes after they devoured their pizza, and went to her room, her stomach growling. High school graduation should have been a joyous milestone. Her classmates were celebrating with parties, gifts, and plans for college. Sarah, however, paid for her own graduation dress with the meager savings she'd managed to squirrel away from her weekly allowance. Her parents showed up just before the ceremony started, sat through the speeches, and applauded politely when she received her diploma. As soon as it ended, Susan checked her watch. "We need to get going," she said, as Sarah approached them, diploma in hand. "Lily has a soccer game in an hour." And just like that, they were gone. Sarah stood there, in her blue graduation gown, surrounded by celebrating classmates, utterly alone. That night, while her classmates partied, Sarah worked her shift at the diner. George, the owner, was surprised to see her. "Sarah, isn't today your graduation? What are you doing here?" She shrugged. "I need the money." He studied her for a moment, then said, "You know, you're one of my best employees. Always on time, never complain. But you can't build a career in a small diner like this." Sarah looked up, unsure what to say. "My nephew, Mark, owns a restaurant downtown. A really nice place. He's always looking for good staff," George continued, wiping down the counter. "I could put in a word for you, if you want. The pay's better, too." 2 weeks later, Sarah started at Mark's restaurant. The work was harder, the hours longer, but the tips were significantly better. Her parents were thrilled when they saw her first paycheck, which, of course, she had to hand over. Her routine changed, but the expectations didn't. Work all day, come home, cook, clean, sleep, repeat. Meanwhile, Lily and Mia lounged on the couch, played video games, and did absolutely nothing to help. One evening, after a particularly brutal 10-hour shift, Sarah came home to find dirty dishes piled high in the sink and laundry strewn all over the floor. "Lily! Mia!" she called out, finding them sprawled in front of the TV. "Could you guys please help me clean up?" Ethan didn't even look away from his game. "That's your job." "I'm not your maid," Sarah said, her patience wearing thin. "You're 12 now, you can help around the house." Mia rolled her eyes. "Mom says we don't have to." Sarah brought it up with her parents that night, but the conversation went exactly as she expected. "They're too young to worry about housework," Susan said, not looking up from her magazine. "I was helping around the house when I was 8, Sarah pointed out. Robert frowned. "That was different. You were more mature." Sarah wanted to scream. Instead, she just walked away, wondering how much longer she could endure this life. 3 more years passed in the same exhausting pattern. Sarah worked at Mark's restaurant, giving almost all her money to her parents. She kept just enough to buy necessities, clothes when her old ones wore out, a new phone when her ancient one finally died. She was good at her job, really good. The customers loved her, the other staff respected her, and Mark noticed. One slow afternoon, Mark called her into his office. Sarah was afraid she'd done something wrong, but he was smiling. "Sarah," he said, leaning back in his chair, "how long do you want to be a waitress?" The question caught her off guard. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it." I've been watching you. You've memorized every dish on the menu, you know which wines pair with which meals. I've seen you eyeing the kitchen, watching the chefs work. Sarah felt her face flush. I'm just curious about the cooking. Mark nodded. That's what I thought. Listen, I've got a proposal for you. I'm willing to pay for cooking courses. You could train to be a cook and work in my kitchen. The pay is better, the hours more regular. What do you think? Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. No one had ever invested in her before. No one had ever offered her a path forward, a future that was actually hers. That night, she practically floated home. For the first time, she had something to look forward to, a potential future she could actually see and touch. She couldn't wait to tell her parents. During dinner, which she'd cooked, as usual, she shared her news. Mark offered to pay for me to take cooking courses, she said, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. I could become a chef at the restaurant. She expected congratulations, maybe even a little pride. What she got was a frown from her mother. What about your hours here at home? Susan asked. Who's going to cook and clean while you're at these classes? Sarah's excitement deflated like a punctured balloon. I'd still help out, she said, her voice faltering. The classes would just be a few nights a week. We rely on you, Sarah, Robert said, as if she didn't already know that. The house doesn't run itself. She looked at Lily and Mia, now 15, perfectly capable of helping, but never asked to. Something hardened inside her. I'm taking the courses, she said firmly. This is important to me. Her parents exchanged glances, but they didn't argue further. They could see she wasn't backing down. The cooking courses were intense but exhilarating. For the first time in her life, Sarah was doing something purely for herself. She learned knife skills, sauce techniques, how to balance flavors. She excelled in every class. At work, she made a friend, Chloe, a waitress who'd started around the same time Sarah began her courses. Chloe was funny, outspoken, and didn't take crap from anyone. So, you live with your parents? Chloe asked one day during their break. Yeah, with my younger sisters, too. And you pay rent? Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Not exactly. I give them most of my paycheck. Chloe's eyebrows shot up. Most? Like, how much? Almost all of it. I keep just enough for basic stuff. And you cook and clean for them, too? While working full-time and taking these classes? When Chloe put it like that, it sounded absurd. Sarah tried to explain her family dynamic, how she'd always been expected to help out, how her sisters were different. Chloe listened, her expression growing more horrified with each word. Sarah, she said when Sarah finished, that's not normal. That's not okay. Your family is taking advantage of you. They're my family, Sarah said weakly. So what? Family is supposed to support each other, not use one person as a personal servant and ATM. You need to get out of there. Live your own life. Sarah laughed it off, but Chloe's words stuck with her. Was she really being taken advantage of? Was what her family asked of her truly that unreasonable? She didn't have to wait long for the answer. The twins' 16th birthday arrived with all the fanfare Sarah had come to expect. Susan ordered a custom cake, shaped like a video game controller for Ethan and decorated with roses for Emma. Robert hung streamers and balloons throughout the house. They invited 20 of the twins' friends, ordered catering, and spent weeks planning the perfect gifts. Sarah was scheduled to work that day, not by accident. Over the years, she'd learned to volunteer for shifts during family celebrations. It hurt less to be absent than to be present but invisible. Her shift at the restaurant was busy, which was a blessing. The constant movement kept her mind occupied, away from thoughts of what was happening at home. By the time she clocked out, she was exhausted, but also ravenous. She hadn't had a chance to eat during her shift. When she got home, the party was winding down. A few of the twins' friends were still hanging around, music was playing, and the house looked like a tornado had hit it. She slipped in through the kitchen door, hoping to grab some food before tackling the mess. She filled a plate with leftover pizza and took a seat at the kitchen table. Just as she was about to take her first bite, Susan walked in. Oh, good, you're home, she said, pulling the plate away from Sarah. The kids made a mess in the living room. Can you start cleaning up? Sarah stared at her, her empty stomach clenching. Mom, I haven't eaten all day. I just want to have something first. The guests are about to leave. I need you to clean now. Her tone left no room for argument. Sarah felt something inside her shift. A cold, hard resolve settled in her chest. I'm hungry. I'm going to eat first. Susan's eyes narrowed. Sarah. Now. Sarah reached for her plate, but Susan snatched it away completely. "Now, Sarah. The dishes can wait until after you've cleaned." That was the moment. The exact moment when something in Sarah broke. She stood up slowly, looking her mother directly in the eyes. "I've been working all day," she said, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "I'm going to eat first." Before Susan could respond, Robert walked in, with Lily and Mia trailing behind him, all smiles and excitement. "Look what we got." Ethan held up the newest smartphone model, one that had just been released and cost nearly $1,000. "And we both got laptops, too," Mia added, beaming, showing off the new MacBooks. Sarah looked from their expensive gifts to her empty stomach, to the mess she was expected to clean, and something just snapped. "Congratulations," she said, her voice louder than intended. "When do you two start working after school?" The room went silent. Lily and Mia looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "What?" Ethan asked. "Working. Jobs. You know, like I've been doing since I was 16? Sarah looked at her parents. "When do they start contributing to the family?" Her parents exchanged glances, and then, unbelievably, they smiled. A condescending, patronizing smile. "Sarah," Robert said in a tone that made her blood boil, "your brother and sister have bright futures ahead of them. They need to focus on school, not work." "And I didn't have a bright future?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking. Susan put her arm around Mia's shoulders. "They deserve the best. Your duty is to work and help your family." There it was. Plain as day. Her siblings deserve the best. Sarah deserved duty. "I see," she said quietly. Susan nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now, please start cleaning up. The living room is a disaster." Sarah went to the sink and began washing dishes mechanically, while behind her, her family started sorting through gifts and planning a vacation, one that, as usual, didn't include her. She didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything Chloe had said, everything she'd experienced, everything she finally understood with perfect clarity. Nothing was going to change. Not unless she changed it. By morning, her decision was made. She waited until everyone had left, Robert and Susan to work, Lily and Mia to school. Then, she packed her belongings into 2 suitcases and a backpack. It didn't take long. After 26 years in this house, she had shockingly little to show for it. She called Chloe, praying she'd answer. "Hey, what's up?" Chloe's voice was cheerful. "Remember when you said I should leave my parents' house?" Sarah's voice was shaking. There was a pause. "Yeah? I'm doing it. Today. Right now. But I need somewhere to go." "Holy crap, Sarah. Come to my place. I've got a spare bedroom. You can stay as long as you need." Sarah hung up, took one last look around her bedroom, and walked out. She didn't leave a note. Why bother? They'd figure it out when they came home to a dirty house and no dinner. The taxi driver helped her load her bags. As they pulled away from the house she'd lived in her entire life, she expected to feel something: sadness, regret, nostalgia. But all she felt was relief. Chloe was waiting for her when the taxi pulled up to her apartment building. She rushed out to help with the bags, hugging Sarah fiercely once they got everything inside. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "This is a big step." Chloe's apartment was small but cozy, decorated with colorful throws and posters from concerts she'd attended. The spare room had just enough space for a bed and a small dresser, but it was more than enough. "I'll pay rent," Sarah said, as she unpacked her clothes. "Half, or whatever's fair." Chloe nodded. "We'll figure it out. No rush." They went to work together that afternoon. Sarah felt lighter, like she'd shed a heavy coat she'd been wearing for years. Mark noticed the change immediately. "You look different today," he said, when she arrived at the restaurant. Sarah smiled. "I moved out of my parents' house." He raised an eyebrow but didn't press for details. "Good for you. Ready for your shift?" By the time they finished work that evening, Sarah's phone had 20 missed calls from her parents. She showed Chloe. "You going to answer?" Chloe asked. "Not yet." They stopped at a liquor store on the way home and bought a bottle of cheap red wine. Back at the apartment, they sat on Chloe's tiny balcony, drinking from mismatched mugs and toasting Sarah's freedom. At 10 p.m., Sarah's phone rang again. Her mother's name flashed on the screen. "I should answer," she said, staring at the phone. "Just to get it over with." Chloe nodded encouragingly. Sarah took a deep breath and hit accept. "Hello? Where the hell are you?" Her mother's voice was shrill with panic and anger. "The house is a mess. There's no dinner. We've been calling for hours. I moved out, Sarah said calmly. There was a beat of silence. What do you mean, moved out? I packed my things and left. I'm not coming back. Don't be ridiculous, Susan snapped. You can't just leave. Who's going to cook and clean? Who's going to? You could try doing it yourselves, Sarah interrupted. Or maybe Lily and Mia could help, since they're the same age I was when I started working. Sarah. Her tone changed, becoming conciliatory. Come home. We need to talk about this properly. No, said Sarah, and hung up. The calls and texts continued for hours. Finally, Sarah turned off her phone. How do you feel? Chloe asked, as they finished the wine. Sarah thought about it, free. Scared. Guilty. Relieved. All of it at once. She clinked her mug against Chloe's. That sounds about right. The next day, her parents were waiting outside the restaurant when her shift ended. Sarah had been expecting them. Chloe offered to stay, but Sarah told her to go ahead. This was something she needed to handle alone. They approached as soon as they spotted her. Susan looked like she'd been crying. Robert looked angry. Sarah, we need to talk, Robert said, trying to take her arm. Sarah stepped back. What about? Susan's face crumpled. We've thought everything over, sweetheart. We realize we've been putting too much pressure on you, making you do too much work. We want you to come home. We'll make changes, I promise. Sarah looked at them both, really looked at them. Their worried expressions, their pleading eyes. And something about it rang false. Tell me, she said slowly, are you more upset that I'm gone, or that my paycheck is gone? Susan's face changed, just for a second, but it was enough. That's not fair. We're your family. We're counting on your salary. There it was. The truth. I'm not coming back, Sarah said, and turned to walk away. You selfish girl. Susan called after her. After everything we've done for you. Sarah kept walking, their words fading behind her. A year passed quickly. Sarah lived with Chloe, paid her share of the rent, and saved the rest of her money. Working as a cook brought her more satisfaction than she'd ever known. Creating dishes, seeing customers enjoy her food, being valued for her skills rather than taken for granted. She'd almost forgotten about her family when her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Hello? Sarah, it's Mom. Sarah nearly hung up. What do you want? We need to talk about the twins' college tuition, Susan said, her voice all business. They'll be starting college next fall. We need your help paying for it. The audacity was breathtaking. You're joking, right? This isn't funny, Sarah. Family helps family. You need to contribute. Like how you helped me with college? Sarah asked. Oh, wait, you didn't. I never even got to go. That was different, Susan insisted. The twins have real potential. Sarah had spent years trying to please this woman, years believing she was somehow less deserving than her siblings. But not anymore. I'm not paying for their college, she said firmly. I'm not giving you another cent. Ever. You selfish, ungrateful. I've been supporting this family since I was 16. Sarah cut her off. I cooked, cleaned, and gave you almost every dollar I earned. You never thanked me, never appreciated me, never treated me like I mattered. I'm done. Susan launched into a tirade about family obligation and how Sarah was letting everyone down. Goodbye, Mom, Sarah said, and hung up. She blocked her number, then changed her own for good measure. Whatever connection had remained between them was finally, completely severed. 2 months after that final call, Sarah found her own apartment. It was small, just a studio with a kitchenette and bathroom, but it was hers. Chloe helped her move in, and they celebrated with takeout on Sarah's second-hand furniture. To independence, Chloe toasted, raising her soda can. To choosing myself, Sarah replied. Now, sitting in her rented apartment, looking at her few belongings, she feels truly free. Yesterday, Mark promoted her to assistant chef. She is saving up for culinary school. For the first time, she is building a future based on what she wants. She doesn't miss her family. Sometimes, she wonders about Lily and Mia, if they're learning to cook and clean, if they've taken jobs to help with their college tuition. Mostly, though, she hopes they learn what took her too long to understand, that love shouldn't be conditional, that family shouldn't exploit you, and that you have value beyond what you can do for others.